Hello, welcome to Truth Salt.
And
I'm
I'm Pepper.
Nicole. So
Truth, salt, and pepper.
salt and pepper. Salt and pepper's here. Um. Anyway, moving right along.
It's gonna be a long night.
Well, thank you for tuning in. I have two special guests here today. I have Russ and Chris.
Hi. Hello.
Welcome, you guys. I invited Chris here today because he has an incredible background. I feel like you're knowledgeable in a kabillion things, one of them being biology. For me, when I learn more, the more I educate myself about biology and science, it really encourages my faith. And I hope that it does the same for you. A big mission of Truth Salt is to help encourage people's faith, help them to be reminded of their purpose and their value and how real the God we serve is. So I have Chris here to share some things. And we're going to go through some documents here just so everyone knows because it is. There's a lot of studies. They're legal documents. I don't know. They may or may not be legal. Because we have the goods over here. So I'm gonna try to keep up with these guys and their knowledge.
Have any knowledge. Don't say these guys.
Anyway.
Hey, science is pretty fun.
So
tell me about it.
Chris.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you. And
you're welcome too.
You're welcome.
Oh.
Thanks, Russ. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here, Russ.
Sure.
You're a real
I'm
pal.
a real addition.
So, sorry.
I had surgery on that one. We're just gonna move on.
So, Chris, when you were in high school and you started thinking about what you wanted to pursue and you started thinking about college, you attended Colorado State University,
yes,
right?
ma'am.
The whole time?
No, that was my undergrad.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So where all did you attend?
CSU and Texas A&M.
Okay.
And Texas A&M was grad school for my master's.
Okay. And your master's is in?
Biology.
Biology. Okay. And did you know from a really young age?
I did. I guess it can be traced back to when I was a kid. My grandfather introduced me to fishing, and for some reason, it stuck. Just infatuated with it, loved the outdoors. And as I grew older, was more aware of biology as a science and like the study of living things. Then I got to 9th grade, we had a sort of a career fair, and this career fisheries biologist popped up. I was like, what is that? And so started digging a little bit more, and that's where it just took off. And that same year, I took my first biology class. And so from 13, 14, 15 years old, I knew the world of fisheries and fish biology was what I wanted to pursue.
That's amazing. That is crazy. You just never know when it's going to start.
Yeah, because I went fishing when I was young. Guess what I didn't become?
This is true. This is true. We're all different, right?
You must have been doing it wrong. I know.
Maybe that was it. But so after you graduated at Texas A&M, what did you do from there?
Well, I think back up before I graduated my undergrad, I had a job at a culture facility. Okay. And basically what that means is a glorified fish farmer. And what we did was raise organisms that monitor the environment. So for example, when it rains, you can take a sample of the runoff and subject that sample to certain organisms. And depending on how they grow, how they reproduce, that sort of thing, you can run some calculations. It'll tell you how toxic that water is. So a big project that we worked on was when the Deep Horizon oil spill in the Gulf happened. Mm-hmm. We were part of that effort to try to predict where the oil and the dispersants were going in the current. They would take samples here throughout the Gulf, and we would send organisms, and then depending on how they grew, the mass that they put on, that would tell which way the oil was going in the Gulf. So I had that job not too long before I graduated my undergrad, and then there was a couple years between undergrad and grad school that I still worked at that facility.
Okay. I'm really grateful for people like you, mm-hmm. and you, Russ, but we need your mind.
Just a punching bag.
We need your mind. I won't hit your shoulder though.
So can I ask a question?
Of course.
Thank you. Um, there's a lot of stuff here,
Sure.
and with your background and what you've done, I know you've done a lot. What do you see as science and faith? Because usually they're opposed. I'm not. I mean, it seems like they're
They're
opposed,
definitely
right? And I
opposed.
know that you share both sides. So, how do you see science actually working together with the word, opposed to against it? I think that's a big question for a lot of people out
Absolutely.
there. So,
And I always considered myself a man of faith first
mhm,
and then a scientist second. I always joke I was a creation specialist.
mhm,
So I would say first, well, I always looked through things through the lens of faith. But when I got into undergrad and started seeing the complex order and structure and like these design like features in some of these biological systems, like you can't, for me, I couldn't deny God was in it. So as far as like why science seems to oppose Christianity and God, it didn't used to be that way.
right.
Like way back in the day, 1600s, whatnot, the church actually sanctioned a lot of this scientific research and a lot of these brilliant minds that we think of, like Isaac Newton, Galileo, Bohr, Pascal, Faraday. Like all these guys were Christians, and they looked at science as a way of investigating the mind of God through his works. So at some point along the way, I'm not sure what happened or where, but there is a split in that dichotomy, and then evolution came along, and oddly enough, Charles
Do you
Darwin,
think that was kind of the
maybe
mark there
it
where
it may have
maybe started
been,
to,
it very well could have been.
because it kind of went against what the biblical account
Absolutely.
is of creation? I don't know. It just seems like I don't know it much, but it seems to always go back to that theory.
But even Darwin himself struggled with evolution as a means for creation, so to speak.
Okay.
He was back and forth on whether or not he believed in God, and there's a lot of interesting things about evolution. And he thought, well, science down the road will figure it out.
Hmm.
So he kind of put faith in the future
So it wasn't
generations.
complete in his
It
mind.
wasn't, the theory was complete for sure, but what it meant in the grand scheme of things and why we're here, he struggled with it.
Okay.
So that may have been the turning point. I'm not sure, but what we know now is that science and faith, for whatever reason, just
Mhm.
butt heads, and
Yeah.
there's no reason for that.
Well,
I
okay. Can I ask?
agree.
So, talking about like how they butt heads, you hear this is what I hear all the time. I believe in science. Like you can't
Yeah.
both. So, what exactly is science for those of you who don't like understand? Like, what is the practice or the science of science? I guess.
So I believe God wrote two books. He wrote the Bible,
Mhm.
and then he wrote a metaphorical book of works, which is
Mhm.
his creation. Now, the Bible was originally in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. I don't speak Aramaic or Greek, so I need a translator so I can understand the Bible. Science is that translator for his creation.
Mm.
It's a set of guidelines. You make an observation, logical steps. If this, then that, then this happens. So you kind of come up with what's called a hypothesis. You design experience to test that hypothesis. If it turns out to support your hypothesis, oh, cool, we're in the right direction. So science really is just a step-by-step observation platform
Mm.
to observe the natural world around us.
Gotcha.
And there's some interesting things too about how science is conducted, but the whole thing with, oh, I believe in science, I don't believe in God. Science in itself, in any good scientist will tell you, science is fallible.
Hmm.
It leaves room to be corrected.
Yeah, you don't hear that too often.
You don't.
Usually, science is synonymous with fact and
Absolutely.
and absolute truth.
Yeah.
Keep going, but yeah, it's
A great example of that is the cosmological constant, which we'll get to later.
what?
But essentially, this came about when Einstein was working on his theory of relativity. He did a bunch of fancy math.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, they believed the universe was static, meaning it wasn't moving. It was just there.
Mm.
So he did general relativity, did a bunch of that math, and he noticed, like, well, according to these calculations, the universe isn't static. It's expanding.
Wow.
And so he said, okay, well, let me just adjust that. I'll just put a constant in here that forced his math to make the universe constant. 1929, Hubble comes around and he discovered, oh, the universe is expanding. It's expanding, and this cosmological constant, later on, we discovered was pretty much Einstein's blunder. And he later on called it his greatest blunder because he shouldn't have put that in. So all that to say, science corrected itself and accepted the correction. And so relating that back to faith, when people say, I believe in science, well, by nature, you should leave room for God.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, it's a very rigid cutoff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I was reading up on a lot of your information, I thought what was really interesting was the fact that even if science could 100% prove all of the things in the Bible, people would still find ways to not believe,
Absolutely.
right?
And
And it's not so true.
we've seen it. If you look back when Christ was walking the earth, I mean, turned water to wine, walked on water, healed lepers, the cripples, like he did all these amazing miracles, and people attributed it to sorcery or it's magic or it's demons even.
Right.
So even though God was with us and performing these miracles, people still didn't believe. So how much more or how much less would we believe today if science could definitively prove
It's true.
and show that God
Mm-hmm.
is real?
Yeah. And I think it comes down to also people don't want to have responsibility for their actions.
Absolutely.
If you can disprove that there's a God or a moral responsibility, then there's no guilt, right? So I think they do anything they can to hang on to just, I exist, there's a science, but there's no ultimate responsibility to share.
And I think God predicted that. Obviously, he knows everything, but there is a Bible verse in Romans 1:20, and you mind if I pull it up?
Nope.
Go for it.
Let's see.
Here, I'll hold your mic.
What it says in Romans 1:20, it says, "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made." So they are without excuse, basically saying God's in nature. There's no excuse for not seeking him out. So he goes on to say, "For although they knew God, they did not honor him or give thanks to him, but they became futile in thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened."
Empty thinking.
Skip on down a few verses. It says, "Because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the creator."
Dude.
So that
There it is, guys.
fits beautifully with what we see today. Originally, the church sanctioned all this science, and we kind of drifted, and we worship nature now. I believe in science. I believe in Mother Earth. I believe.
And so, okay, with that, this is what's actually kind of funny about people who say, I just believe in science. Is there still a leap of faith in that? Because I know that there's limits to what science can actually do.
Right.
It doesn't prove anything beyond, like, it's not fact.
It's kind of interesting because science doesn't prove anything. One of the things that was driven into my training in grad school is that what science really does is it gathers evidence to suggest a direction of truth. So the reason science can't definitively prove absolute truth is just there's no way of knowing. You know, if we're doing a study, let's say on fish in the ocean, and we set out nets, there's ultimately bias in that. How big is the net? Where do we place the net? What kind of fish? That sort of thing. And even in the statistics it calculates this, the standard is what they call a confidence interval. It's 95% confidence interval or alpha. And all that means is we're 95% sure that this is the case. That 5% error gets into like type 1 and type 2 errors, which is
over our head.
Something a little different. But the take home point is that science leaves room for itself to correct itself. And so there's no way of definitively knowing absolute truth in anything. And it's interesting because there's another Bible verse in Deuteronomy 29 that basically talks about the secrets belong to the Lord and what has been revealed belongs to man. And so science won't ever prove absolute truth, nor can it ever discover anything about the natural world because there are secrets that belong to God.
Right. And would you say science itself is bound by the natural world?
It has to be.
It can't deal with anything that we deal with in terms of an invisible God, faith, love, mercy, grace. I mean, all that.
I think you hit on something really interesting is that science is bound by the natural laws. It observes the natural laws. So how in the world could science reproduce and make a hypothesis on turning water to wine or walking on water? There's no way we can reproduce that.
Yeah, you just try to disprove it.
You try
to make some.
Right, which is another good point. Science only shows what something is not. And so since many great scientists are brilliant minded in the natural laws, they're bound by those natural laws. So from the beginning, they exclude the idea of God. And so it's biased from the very beginning.
Yeah. And God can enter into his creation at any
He
time and break those rules.
he created it so he can do whatever
Hence
he wants.
rock
Right.
water out of a rock. I mean, that's a good one.
That-
Man.
And the evidence of hypovolemic shock.
That's a really
Am I
cool one.
right?
Yes, ma'am. That's a really cool
That's
one.
a scary one.
Yeah. But it's interesting.
It
You know,
is.
not
Like-
from like the
Yeah.
grotesque stuff,
All right,
but
since you brought it up,
In the regards of the crucifixion,
right.
the piercing of the heart with blood and water pouring out.
Right. So it goes more into just the blood and water.
and so you're saying now Bible can actually
Whoops.
prove science and point to science before science was even aware of something.
I wouldn't. So the Bible is not a science textbook.
Right.
However, it does point to scientific principles that
that's
we had no idea
Mhm.
until
Right.
much later. So you brought up the hypovolemic shock. So when Christ was arrested, he was taken and beaten by the Romans. Pretty bad. I mean, what's interesting about that whole thing is that people back then were either crucified or they were beaten, not both.
Mhm.
Christ was beaten, and if you read the accounts in the gospel, he lost a lot of blood. He was really weak. And then they took him out to the hill to crucify him, and there was so much blood loss and everything, he was really weak. And that's an example of hypovolemic shock. You just get really fatigued because you're losing blood. And so they crucified him on the cross. And so what we know there is severe blood loss from the beating and from the crucifixion, extreme exhaustion, dehydration. When Christ said, "I thirst," that was a sign of him being dehydrated, which is a sign of hypovolemic shock. There was rapid death, which surprised Pilate. The verse is like, "Oh, he's dead already." Complete blood loss. And then you mentioned piercing of the side. There was blood and water came out. Now, the other interesting thing about that is there's an argument saying, well, it can't be true because water or this clear fluid would come out before the blood. And if that's the case, he should have wrote water then blood. But you have to understand, like,
let's nitpick, huh?
It's an argument,
Wow,
right?
Yeah.
But here's the response to that is in the Greek language, in the Greek grammar, you don't always put what you see first. You put the thing in the greatest volume or greatest amount. So if you pierce the heart, there's going to be a lot of blood and then much less of the clear fluid. So the New Testament was written in Greek grammar rules. So naturally, water before blood would be the case.
That's really
So,
interesting.
And that's
and then we didn't know, like the fluid could have come around the lungs or the heart, the pericardial or the pleural sac, but that is just a function of being beaten, severe blood loss, severe shock. And there's really no way back then they had the medical knowledge to know all these things, but yet the Gospels record it medically accurate. In that point,
without being medically minded, it was just
exactly
Right.
exactly. So that's one example, a great example of where
that's a big deal.
it is.
That,
absolutely.
honestly.
So a couple more along those lines, if you want to kind of get into that, is the book of Job, chapter 38, is a little bit of a gold mine when it comes to this kind of stuff. So let's see.
Russ. I'm sorry, Chris.
That's all right. So talking about this stuff and whatnot, and later we'll get into fine-tuned constants of the cosmos and whatnot. Job 38:5, number 1 says, "Who determined its measurement? Surely you know, or who stretched the line upon it?" And this is when God was talking to Job back and forth, and God's kind of saying, "I'm God, you're not." So this is evidence that God is calling out these exact measurements and whatnot. But the cool one I wanted to point out is Job 38:31. Again, this is God back and forth with Job, and this is God speaking. "Can you bind the chains of Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion?" And in some translations, or loose the belt of Orion.
No way.
So what's interesting about this, the book of Job is the oldest book in the Bible, and they think it dates back to around the time of Abraham.
Wow.
So no way of knowing advanced astronomy back then. Well, Pleiades was discovered to be gravitationally bound by Reverend John Mitchell in 1767. And so what that means is this 3-star system is gravitationally locked and it's moving through the universe bound together. Can you bind the chains of Pleiades? It's pretty interesting. Now, it was later confirmed in the 18th and 19th centuries that it's in gravitational lock. Now, the Orion's belt, the 3 stars in Orion's belt, in the 1970s, it was confirmed and found that those 3 stars are drifting apart. So his belt is loosening.
Huh.
So how in the world
I've never heard this.
was a book
Wow.
as old as the story of Abraham, how could it possibly have predicted
Right.
these 2 constellations with such scientific accuracy?
Right.
It's pretty phenomenal.
Crazy. That is.
So what are some other things that, like maybe a little reverse, where science is pointing to an intelligence?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
they're not proving anything; they're discovering.
Right. Yeah. The proof is one of those weird words.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean. Like, there's certain things about our natural world that appear highly designed and tuned. So we'll get into some of these really cool ones. For example, our atmosphere. We obviously breathe oxygen, and we know there's oxygen in the atmosphere. Well, there was a period in Earth's history called the Carboniferous period. And there's a bunch of cool studies that in that era, we know that the atmosphere was about 30 to 35% oxygen. Well, just from modern science, we know about 25%. That's when wildfires start becoming uncontrollable and things start burning. And we've seen that in the layer of the Carboniferous period. So around 25%, these fires start burning things, ignition, combustion starts happening crazily. Now, on the opposite of that, around 15, 16% oxygen, it's really difficult for complex organisms and structures to persist with any direction, because we need that oxygen to produce something called adenosine triphosphate. So
Say that again.
adenosine triphosphate.
Adenosine triphosphate.
That's just the energy molecule that allows us to do this podcast, to drive our car, that sort of thing. So 15% is when things start struggling. 25, 26, 27% is when fire really starts creating unstable environments. Our atmosphere is 21% oxygen, right in the middle, very stable.
Wow.
And so there is a little pushback with that. You know, some scientists, oh, well, that's because it's a feedback type of process. It has to be that because fires will burn down. But if you look at that in conjunction with some of these other parameters, it's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
So to further that, we are 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% other stuff in the atmosphere. So we talked about what happens if oxygen kind of gets out of hand, but nitrogen is interesting too. It stabilizes the oxygen levels, and it provides weight on our atmosphere so that liquid water can be pretty common. And liquid water is incredibly important to life. It enables a lot of metabolic processes. It stabilizes structures. Not to mention, we're on a planet that's 3/4 water, which is pretty incredible. So we have a large reservoir of nitrogen in the atmosphere, and nitrogen is also one of those molecules and substances that's really important to life. A lot depends on it. That's just the atmosphere alone.
Wow.
So what that shows is that life requires a narrow range of oxygen that this Earth sits comfortably in. So
that's just wild luck.
It's an argument. It's an argument.
I mean, I don't know if you have the stats. If the Earth is moved off its orbit just slightly, life would cease to exist.
So what?
Would it get too hot or too cold?
Right. What you're referring to is the Goldilocks belt.
Come on, y'all.
And so
I know all about
good old Goldilocks and
not
three
too,
bears.
Yeah, not too hot, not too cold. So what that basically entails is every star has what's called a Goldilocks belt. It's in the right orbit, right distance from its star that can allow life to happen. With regards to the Earth, if we're too close, then we run the risk of burning our atmosphere off. And well, that's not good because we need that atmosphere for protection. If we're too close, the water will evaporate. You know, water, like we said, is incredibly important to life. If we're too far away, water freezes. It's really hard to have life and ice, that sort of thing. So the Earth sits in precisely the belt that it needs to sit for all these things to harbor life. That's not saying that planets don't sit in Goldilocks belts on other stars. It's just ours sits here with some of these other parameters in conjunction. That's pretty remarkable.
That's, to me, you know, as you're I mean, people are probably just sitting there going, I got to watch this again just to absorb so much of what you're saying. How do we, like people out there maybe watching, um, and they they hear this and they get inspired, but they're not scientists, right? And
Mhm.
most of them are not going to remember all this. Like, oh,
Right.
how do you, how would you encourage them just with, because I feel like the world tries to intimidate you, right? With with
Right.
with the science, facts, and logic, and that we're illogical, and then people end up getting quiet because they don't feel like they can defend it. And I, I don't know if like you, without even the science part, there's just a place in you where you just settled and just said, God is God.
Absolutely.
Um,
And there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know.
I agree.
I had a professor in undergrad who told us, don't try to lie on an exam. If you don't know, put I don't know and I'll give you partial credit.
huh.
There is a high level of intelligence saying,
Hmm.
I don't know. That's a
That's
great
good.
That's
question.
okay.
See,
Let
that's
me
good to hear because I think people always assume that person knows everything.
right,
So therefore, I'm not even going to open that can of
right.
worms. And you're right.
Or
And
we
and
just
I think we need to remember too, if you are of faith and think back to when after Christ resurrected, doubting Thomas, he showed Thomas and he said, blessed are those who believe and have not seen.
That's
You do not need to see all of this. Our salvation is not based on
Mhm.
believing science or what God has put in the
right.
creation. It's based
Right.
on faith.
Yeah.
So you can just say, I don't know, Christ died. I'm
Mhm.
forgiven.
Yeah. No,
I'm
Yeah.
good with it.
Yeah.
that's we were talking earlier before. It's stuff that I never knew, but just hearing it encourages me as pointing to an intelligent design. Just even the DNA you were talking about.
Yeah.
You got to hear this. This is nuts.
So let's talk about some cool DNA facts.
Okay, some DNA.
So DNA, all of life on Earth is DNA based, and it's a short an acronym for deoxyribonucleic acid.
Can you repeat that?
There'll be a test later. So what makes up Russ, your height, your hair color, your eyes, the way your facial hair grows in, what makes up Nicole, all of that is encoded genetic information into your DNA, down to the very last hair follicle. So it's based on 4 building blocks: adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine. Adenine always pairs with thymine. So when they interlock, they pair. Cytosine always with guanine. And what's incredible about that is of the known animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, there's roughly 2 million described species, give or take, that's on planet Earth that we know of. Of the undisclosed or undiscovered, it could be up to 1 trillion species, bacteria, ants,
Wow.
bugs,
Wow.
that sort of thing. So all of that life is based on those 4 molecules. And to show you how well the DNA is at encoding information, here's just a standard paper clip. If you take the weight of this paper clip, which is about 1 gram, and you take this paper clip's worth of DNA, you could take every book ever written by mankind and encode it thousands and thousands of times. So to put it in other words, more modern terms, we could take paper clips worth of DNA and encode the entire internet a few times, all the information on the internet into a paperclip. So it's a remarkably well-designed molecule for holding information. And studies and companies are trying to access DNA for other storage devices, like basically a thumb drive. So it's
That makes me think about us being fearfully and wonderfully
absolutely
made. That's all I can think about when you were talking about that, because that's a verse that I always, over the years, have thought about. What does that mean exactly? And it's like when you're working on something so delicately, and it's so uniquely, like you just described, that makes me think of that verse. Fearfully, like you want to be so careful
right.
and precise,
It's very
and
precise.
every single living thing. Oh my gosh.
So
It's
there's
crazy.
a couple other things that kind of point to God with DNA. Back in the 50s, there was a set of experiments done by a couple guys named Uri Miller. And so what they did is they put all this primordial earth stuff in a jar and they ran an electrical current through it and they let it sit. And so what they were able to discover is they basically created amino acids, which amino acids are the basic building blocks for DNA, these little proteins. And they said, well, that's cool. We've got the start of DNA. What they didn't see was life or the ability of these DNA afterward, the amino acids build DNA structures. So later on, they did some more studies and let this experiment run a little bit longer, and they were able to create those proteins, but it was just a molecule. So the question becomes, where did our genetic information come from? Those experiments showed that DNA can occur naturally in nature, but unless something outside puts information in it, it's just a molecule.
That's okay. The word that keeps coming back for me that hopefully is an encouragement, to you, I'll take the pastor kind of angle. It's everything you're talking about is when you choose to see the world, science, everything that surrounds us through the eyes of an intelligent design, then it's purposeful. There's intent. Without that, there's not a true sense of purpose. If we're just here randomly by some cosmic accident, our chance, where's the sense of purpose? But when it says, I knew you while you're in your mother's womb, understanding DNA, you know that every bit of information already is in that fetus. I mean, so of course he knows what he placed.
The moment of conception, that individual has its own unique genetic code.
Yeah, created by God for a purpose. And I try to hold on to simple things. And to me, design is everything. And it says you've been created in Christ Jesus to walk, in good works. That's a big deal because there's intent. When a creator creates, they create it for a reason, for a purpose, to achieve and to do, right? Everything that you see that God has made has a job. Has a purpose. Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, even from the atmosphere to the DNA to everything that you were talking about. So us as human beings, to me is like the crown jewel.
100%.
It just shows you that there's so much in terms of, man, God made me for a reason.
And with us as human beings, what sets us apart too is we have a soul.
Well,
I mean, that's a whole nother thing.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting though, because there has been, I guess, observations. People near death, they've taken a weighed them, and after they pass, they're slightly lighter.
Really?
I don't. It's not rigorous science based, but it's just kind of like a neat observation. So take that with a grain of salt. It's not based in like sound science, but it's an observation that's really interesting. We talked earlier about the cosmological constant, which to me, that's the big science thing that points towards God. So in, I guess, simple terms, it represents the energy of empty space. We've all heard like this dark energy, dark matter type of thing. So this is kind of related to that. It's like a weird abstract.
I never know what they're really talking about.
I basics I get, but it's above my pay grade. But anyways, this cosmological constant is responsible for a lot in the universe. And if that constant was any larger, matter wouldn't clump, galaxies wouldn't form, stars wouldn't form, planets wouldn't form. The universe would remain a giant gas cloud. If it was any smaller, then the universe would collapse in on itself. So it's precisely where it needs to be in order for the observable universe. So it's really phenomenal. And even secular scientists and Christian scientists both say this appears well-tuned, well thought out, well designed. And basically everything can rely on this cosmological constant that prevents absolute destruction. A couple more talking about the cosmos is our sun is extremely stable. It's not violent, so that stabilizes our life here on Earth, our climate, and that sort of thing. Also, the position of where we are in the Milky Way. If we were any closer to the center of the galaxy, we would be bombarded with radiation, supernova. So it's kind of crazy that we're here, but if we were too far out, there is a definite gradient of heavy elements as you go from the center out. And so there is some speculation that rocky planets like Earth would have a much, much more difficult time coalescing, I guess, being formed. So we're right in what they call that galactic habitable zone. Not only are we Goldilocks around our sun, but we're in Goldilocks around the center of the Milky Way.
Wow.
Just some more real quick. The strength of gravity, if the gravity force was any smaller, planets and galaxies may never form. If it was any bigger, stars might burn through their fuel too quick, be a little more violent. The strength of the strong nuclear force, which has to do with protons and electrons, it wouldn't allow elements to bind. And things like heavier than hydrogen wouldn't necessarily bind. So it's kind of crazy that chemistry is dependent on that. The ratio of proton mass and electron mass, same thing. Like the list just goes on and on and on.
Wow.
But these are just some of the interesting ones. And I want to note too, like there's people out there that are far more intelligent and far more eloquent to talk about these things than me. So if you're interested, there's tons of resources out there that probably won't confuse you like I'm doing, but can
You're
give
not.
a much
You're making
better
a lot of sense. That's
a
what's
much
nice.
You are
better
making a lot of
argument for it.
Yeah. I can't.
So
Well, and you brought this book. This is The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. And Chris has been so generous to offer giving away this book, and I'll explain how to get that later. And then he also brought In the High Places. This is written by Chris.
Yeah,
Chris
no biggie.
himself.
No biggie.
He's
a Renaissance man.
Yes. This is a book of poetry, and it is beautiful, beautiful for you to read personally, but also would make a beautiful gift too. It's so well written. And
thank you.
No,
Thank you.
This is a good book for someone that is more wired, maybe like myself. We didn't necessarily study this in school, and it's just easier to understand, maybe a little bit simpler put.
He does
a really good
a
read.
brilliant job with the language he uses is easy to follow. This particular book gets more into the apologetics and like showing Christ was a real individual and he did real stuff.
Yeah.
So it approaches it from that angle. But Lee Strobel also wrote another book, The Case for Creator, which is phenomenal. And it goes more into some of these scientific constants that we've been talking about. But it's the same.
And it's an easy read.
It is.
It's not like
Right.
goes over your head.
It's not a science book.
Yeah.
And Lee Strobel, for those that don't know, he was an atheist. His wife was a Christian. And so he set out to kind of disprove Christianity. He graduated from law school, but he was a reporter, a writer, a law writer. So he would go to these cases and he would cover court cases and that sort of thing. So he went around the country interviewing the experts of the experts, asking them all the hard questions that I know we all have asked at some point, and getting a real answer to these questions. And then at the end of the book, he was humble enough to say, I was wrong.
Yeah.
And so basically his journey into faith is captured in The Case for Christ. And he went on to write Case for Creator. There's one for Miracles, a slew of other really well-written.
Well, so what I'm hearing from all that is that his wife was right.
His wife was right.
That's good.
That's my takeaway. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Oh, I found that verse, by the way.
Great. What is it?
Because I think it helps sum up a lot of this. First Chronicles 29. And at verse 11, but David is blessing the Lord in front of all of Israel. He's announced the building of the temple that his son will undertake. And it talks about all the material that they've gathered and everything that's going to be done to make this great. But then he says, let's bless the Lord. And I love how he blesses the Lord. He says, yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power. Now, just think about like this, even in the scientific, all those things that you're saying, that fine, delicate balance, right? If it were to shift, I mean, it's death or it's life. And it says, and the glory and the majesty and splendor for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Heavens meaning the stars, heaven, the atmosphere, the things beyond earth. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor comes from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all.
It's pretty overwhelming.
But it was just a way to sum it up. Like, it's like a simple, they didn't have science.
Right.
They're like, but
Right.
all this, you're over and control. You
Right.
hold it together. And to me, this only proves that, right? I mean, it's great to have these types of like actual facts that point to something that is, it's a God. Like that.
And the beauty of it is we have the Bible that tells us who that God is.
Right.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
name.
Right.
No, multiple names, not multiple gods, multiple names, 3 in 1. And there's a reason and to everything.
Right.
And ultimately he's good. Ultimately, he's love. Ultimately, he's full of grace and mercy. He's righteous. He's just, but he's all those things.
Yeah. And he is risen. We're getting closer to Easter. And that's another thing, that the resurrection sets us apart from other religions, because a lot of people, can't deny that Jesus was a living person.
That's a whole other
That's a
can
whole
of
nother
worms.
I've
Heard
thing.
science try to say
Yeah.
Part two.
Oh my
Tune in
goodness.
He didn't
So,
really
at
die.
another
He was
time.
unconscious. He hopped.
oh man,
He hopped. Got up, hopped, and then opened. Anyway,
Got
up
and
opened
hopped.
the
it's
yeah.
pretty incredible the amount
Why
of
did he hop? Those
Because
are
you
the
have to. He's all laced up. Whatever.
yeah.
That's how I
yes,
did it.
yes.
That's a fascinating conversation with the apologetics and the gospels. And
I think
I
we should
love
have you
that.
back.
Absolutely.
I want to touch on something that you were just talking about. We mentioned earlier, you don't have to know this stuff to be saved. You just have to know who Christ was and who he claimed to be is who he was. However, Peter tells us in First Peter that we need to have a reason for our faith. So when others come up and say, what's with this Christian thing? It's okay to say, I don't know, I just believe there's something about it. However, if you can articulate some of these arguments that point to God in a respectful and loving way, you might win some to Christ, and that's the ultimate goal. The information is there.
And the more you learn about him and the more you study the word, the deeper your relationship will be with him.
Absolutely. Why would he create a universe so vast if he just wanted to keep us contained? The more you dig into that and the more you seek God in the natural world and in scripture, the Holy Spirit will do his part. Things will start making sense. Things will start clicking. And the whole purpose of the Holy Spirit was to point everybody to Christ. Yeah. So if I was in the time of Christ, without the Holy Spirit, like, would I know him? Like, would I see him as who he truly is? Which is kind of a scary thought.
I know.
That's a really good question.
Thank God, God put me here right now.
No, it's true.
So it's an interesting, I guess, thought experiment.
Even people that witnessed him firsthand had questions and doubts.
I think there needs to be a part 2.
I agree, especially as we're approaching Easter too. It would be great to talk about apologetics and the resurrection, and that's one of my favorite topics. And I really want to thank you for all the time that you took to provide us with information beforehand, so that we can participate in this conversation.
Sure, I love doing this stuff. So thank you.
This book was dedicated to Chris's beautiful wife, Taryn. Thank you again for these books, and I will put information so that we can give these away. And thank you, Russ, too, for being here as well. I was nervous because, I'm like, can I keep up with this conversation on my own? I know Russ is really good at this. It's nice to hear a pastor's take on things. For those of you listening, I just want to remind you that you were fearfully and wonderfully made. You were put here for a reason. And you were precisely made. God has so much for you. Life is so worth living. I hope that you got some great things out of this. Come back again real soon. Take care.